Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome back to another virtual shiur over here of Pirkei Avos. I was hoping perhaps the Beis Middos will be filled tonight, but it's filled with empty chairs. One day, Be'ez Hashem, we're going to get back to a point where it's going to be filled with people once again. But I'll be patient, and you'll be patient, and the Jewish people are a nation of patience. Have been waiting 2,000 years for Mashiach to come and the building of the Beis HaMikdash. We'll wait a little bit longer for the people to come back to Shul, Be'ez Hashem. I'd like to discuss tonight a famous topic, which as we embark on another year, this is really our second round together of learning Pirkei Avos. We started last year right after Pesach, when the world was shut down and the shuls were closed still. And we began it because there's a Midhar, there's a custom that from the days of Pesach until Shavuos, the Jewish people have a custom of every week reading one of the chapters in Pirkei Avos. We have 7 weeks altogether between Pesach and Shavuos. There's 6 chapters of Pirkei Avos, so from 1 till 6 we finish. And then the last week you can review either everything or you can review your favorite Mishnayos that you have in Pirkei Avos. So the question is, what's so significant about this time of the year, why we usually embark upon the learning of Pirkei Avos? Even in Shul, we have a very long-standing tradition that on the Shabbos afternoons, between Pesach and Shavuos, and we usually stretch it out until the clocks change, we learn ethics of our fathers, and we're on, in the last 10 years, we're on our 3rd round already of going through all of the chapters. And it's the question why it is that we do it every year during this time. What's so significant, and the connection between the Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, and these 7 weeks in time. So I want to share with you tonight 3 answers. And the first 2 we'll go a little bit quicker through. And the last one is what we're going to spend the majority of this year trying to understand better. So the Rabbi Yonah writes that it's coming in correlation to the season, the actual climate of the year, which we are embarking upon at this point. It's the springtime, the sun is coming out, the heat is warming up, and as we know, especially those of us that live here in Los Angeles, California, when the heat rises, so the clothes somehow begin to fall off, and all of the desires of the physical desires of a person, they start getting heated up during this time of the year. Something called a Yetzer Hara, called an evil inclination, and we need an anchor to hold ourselves in check to make sure that we will behave in the best possible way, and that we will be in control of our desires, and our desires will not be in control of us. In order for a person to accomplish that, they need to learn something called Musar. Musar is the work of ethics. It is the work of, I don't want to call it philosophy because it's not really philosophy. It is a Torah outlook on the way in which a person is going to live their life, how they're going to utilize their energies, their strengths, their talents, their skills, their abilities, to hone them in to the right direction, how they're going to work on their Middos, on their character traits, and in general, how they're going to learn how to control the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, to do that which is right. The Mishnah Berurah himself writes that every person needs to make sure that they are fluent and that they are learning the Sifrei Musar, the works of Musar every day. The Chassam Sofer, who was one of the greatest of all generations, he said the following words, which obviously we don't understand what he means, but he said, on a day that he did not spend time learning Musar, he felt that he was like a behemoth, he felt like an animal. Now that means that the Chassam Sofer, on his lofty, high level that he was on, he understood that learning the works of Musar, which again we're calling them the ethics, where a person learns how to be Moser, how to give over of themselves for the sake of spirituality. And Musar means they turn themselves away as well from the things that are negative and having a bad influence and an impact on a person. So the Chassam Sofer felt that on his level, if he didn't learn Musar in the right way, or he didn't learn Musar at all, he said, so he felt that too much of the animalistic desires that were inside of him, they were teeming on those days. So he was careful, apparently. He was very careful to make sure that he learned every day. So says the Rabbeinu Yoina, that's the reason that we spend this time between Pesach and Shavuos. This is the springtime, things are coming into blossom, the sun is beginning to shine more, there's a lot of attractions going on the streets, and therefore the Yetzer Hara might be peaking at an all-time high after the dormancy of the winter months, so we need to control ourselves. What can we do to work on ourselves to be able to know what is right and what is wrong, which direction and pathway we should go in? You have to learn Pirkei Avos, which is filled with gems and pearls of Musar to direct us and to guide us into the proper direction and path in life. That's one of the reasons why we do it at this point. Another one is that which is brought down from the Middos Shmuel, one of the Hasidic masters. And the Middos Shmuel is a commentary on Pirkei Avos. And the Middos Shmuel, I'm thinking of the Shem Mishmuel, but the Middos Shmuel writes the following. He says, Shebiyomim elu, during these days between Pesach and Atzeres and Shavuos, Meisu Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. As we know, the students of Rabbi Akiva, 24,000, passed away during this time. I intend in another shir at another point to speak about this more in depth, so I don't want to go into the details so much, but suffice to say, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, who was the leading sage of the generation. And these 24,000 students, they were the cream of the crop, the most elite of all of the yeshiva bachrim that there were in the world at the time. They were intended to be the future leaders and teachers and disseminators of Torah for the generations that are coming up. And yet, tragically, they all died during this period of time, these 7 weeks, or as is calculated, 33 days, how you look at it. They died during these days, the 24,000 students, not a single one was left. Says the Middos Shmuel, V'hadavar moireh, this teaches us, Shemidas hadin mesucha ba'olam, the attribute of justice is very strong in the world during this time of the year. That's why we have halachas, we have laws, where we are observing some of the laws of mourning during this time, to commemorate and to pay tribute to and to recognize and acknowledge the fact that these great students perished during this time tragically. And therefore, if this is the time, as we know, that it's not just like an anniversary of that which took place 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, rather that same spiritual content that was in the air back then is in the air right now. And so therefore, says the Middos Shmuel, during this time of the year, it's not just that they died 2,000 years ago in the times of Rabbi Akiva, but rather in the world right now, in the spiritual realms that we live in. So we see that there is a Midas Hadin, there is an attribute of judgment that is in the world. And therefore, Ubiyamei Din, when there is judgment in the world, as we know, when the month of Elul begins, we know that we are 30 days away from coming to Rosh Hashanah. When we get to Rosh Hashanah, we realize that we are only 10 days away from Yom Kippur. As the days are passing one after the other, and we're getting to Yom Kippur, the true day of all, where Hashem is going to judge us, or He is going to either forgive us or not forgive us for everything that we've done wrong, there's a trembling that is in the world. A person has trepidation when they know that they are being judged in such a way. So during that time, ha'adam hu yareh v'chared, a person trembles with fear. V'yichnesu direi ha'teichacha is belibo yoisem b'shar yamim. And it's true, says the Middos Shmuel, that the words of teichacha, of rebuke, and the words of musar can enter into a person's heart more during those days of fear and awe and reverence than they could during any other time of the year. Just like we said, we know that when Rosh Hashanah is coming, and we are all getting ready to meet our Master, our Creator. He's going to judge us on the previous year, and He's going to decide what's going to be for the up and coming year. So therefore, if we go to shul, we hear a shmooze, a musar shmooze, or we hear some inspiring story, the inspiration sticks more during that time. So he writes over here, it should be the same idea. And that is that these are times where we should be more open to hear what is being said, more cognizant of the fact that there is a Middos Adin. If the greatest students of all time could all have died during this period in history, and they must have been doing many mitzvahs, learning a lot of Torah, they're all big tzaddikim, so we have to be concerned that we have to pull our own weight to make sure that we're doing what is right. He writes, and therefore during the days of Sfiras HaOmer, where we are counting up towards Shavuos, we could receive the words of rebuke easier. And his heart is more humbled during this time. Number one, because we are observing some laws of mourning. He doesn't get married, he doesn't shave, he doesn't cut his hair. And therefore, during these times, it's just easier. It's much easier for a person to be able to hear what it is that they need to work on and to change. So where are we going to find that more than any other place in all of Shas, in all of the Talmud and the Mishnah? We'll find that in the words of Pirkei Avos. But now I'd like to discuss with you what is to me anyway, is the central theme during these 7 weeks, and the reason why we spend so much time learning Pirkei Avos and trying to understand deeper what the words of our great sages mean. And he says the following, and this is from the Chassid Horowitz, one of the great sages, previous generation. He says the following, Ha-Torah leitishkain ki'im berekan mimidas ra'is. The Torah itself, remember, let's just get a perspective of where we're holding in history. The Jewish people have left Egypt. They were redeemed by Hashem. They went through the splitting of the sea. They watched the enemies drown behind them. They are now marching towards Har Sinai. They're getting ready to accept the Torah upon themselves. You think that it's easy for a slave nation, even though they saw miracles, and even though they were brought to a level of emunah, of faith in Hashem, and even though they were able to point with their finger and say, Zeh keli v'anvehu, this is my God and I will glorify Him, even though they had all of that. Do you think that it's so easy to wash away 210 years of impurity, 210 years of slavery, 210 years of being entrenched in Mitzrayim, in the place that knew no limitations on how much it could do to oppress a person spiritually? It's not so easy. And therefore, in order for Klal Yisrael to be able to receive the Torah at Har Sinai, they had a lot of work that they had to do during these weeks. They had to go up one level after another. They had to cleanse themselves and release and let go of the impurities of Egypt until they went from the 49th level of Tumah, of impurity, to reach the 49th level of Tahara, of purity and Kedusha and holiness. Takes a lot of hard work. Says the Horowitz, the Torah itself will not it will not rest and dwell within a person unless they are reikan, they are emptied out of midos ra'is, of bad midos, bad character traits. Umale mimidos chashuvos, and they must be filled with very noteworthy and noble midos, character traits. And that is why, says the Horowitz, that between Pesach and Shavuos, where we are preparing ourselves, marching every single day, one level higher and higher and higher towards Har Sinai, the only way that a person is going to merit to have the gift of the Torah being given to them is if they are prepared. How does a person prepare for Maimon Har Sinai, for standing by Mount Sinai? Says the Horowitz, the only way that you can truly prepare is is if you will empty yourself out of all the negative character traits that you have. Anger, hardiness, laziness, jealousy, stinginess, cruelty, lack of sensitivity, you name it, whatever you could imagine as a bad trait, you must begin to wipe it out of the system now. Because if you want to engage in the receiving of the Torah, which is the most pristine, purest thing in the entire world, it is the das Elokis, it is the mind, keviyochel of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no negative character traits. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has not 1 ounce of bad that is in him. Punishing a person is not bad. Punishing a person, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu does to us on different occasions of our lives, is part of his kindness because he wants to rectify our ways. He wants to make sure that we learn our lessons in life. When a parent gives a consequence to a child, they're not using cruelty, they're not being harsh and being mean. They're doing it because they love their child and they want to make sure that they understand what is appropriate and what is inappropriate behavior, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. We are here to train and to make sure that our children understand what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has not an ounce of badness in him. So if you want to receive the Torah, which is compared to his mind, which means it's all of the essence, all of the Middos, all the character, so to speak, of Hashem, then we must be someone that is worthy of receiving that. How do we make ourselves into a kli, into a vessel that is going to merit that receiving? Says the Yavitz, 1 way. Empty yourself out of all the negative traits that you have and fill yourself up with Middos chashuvos, with the beautiful, noteworthy, noble, and refined character traits. Humility, kindness, mercy, compassion, sensitivity, thoughtfulness, you name it, whatever midah you could imagine in your mind is a positive trait, it's all included. How are we going to do that? How does a person, first of all, recognize all the traits that are bad? And how does a person then recognize all of the traits that are good and then know how to work on extracting the negative and implementing the positive? Says the Yavitz, that's what Pirkei Avos is for. Pirkei Avos is a masterful compilation of the greatest statements that our sages ever said of all time. Each one sharing with us for all of history what is considered to be the best way for a person to live their life. What are the negative traits that a person must eradicate from their composition and from their makeup? What is the pathways that a person should go down to the best of their abilities? How should they serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How should they work on their amunah and their faith? How should they see that everything that's going on in this world is a gezerah min hashamayim, is a decree from above? How does the person know how to inspire themselves on a constant basis? And v'chule, so on and so forth. There are messages after messages, lessons of life after lessons of life that we must learn. Says the Yavitz, we do it now during this time because it's apropos. When the nation of Klal Yisrael is preparing themselves for Har Sinai to stand by the mountain, remember when Shavuos will come, we're all standing by the mountain. We're all getting ready on the night of Shavuos to stand there like the Jewish people stood 3,500 years ago and receive the Torah upon ourselves. You want the Torah, says Hashem. You better make sure that you're a vessel that is worthy of receiving it. Imagine you have a beautiful, beautiful crystal glass and you cannot wait to pour the finest wine in the world into that glass. Who knows, it's a vintage bottle from some fancy, fancy place in the world. It was made in 1862. It's been chilling in a cellar, has not lost its taste at all. It is ready for you to partake of. and you pull out this beautiful crystal glass, and you cannot wait to imbibe this glass of wine and enjoy and savor every sip. And you pour the wine into the glass. And you know that there is a halacha in drinking wine. You must let it sit so that the wine can breathe a little bit before you drink it. So you look at that glass of wine and you see how beautiful it looks. The crystal is sparkling in the overhead lights, the chandelier. And you walk away from the table for a few minutes to go take care of something while the wine is breathing. Unbeknownst to you, there is a crack in the bottom of the glass. And the crack is just deep enough that the wine is leaking out of that crack that is there. And when you come back now 5 minutes later to partake of that most delectable glass of wine, lo and behold, the glass is empty. There's nothing there. How could it be? The crystal is beautiful. The wine is the finest bottle that you could find. However, since that there's a crack in that glass, there's a hole that the wine is seeping out of, no matter how much you would like that wine to be there, it's not going to stay inside. Says the Horowitz, Klal Yisrael is a nation of crystal glasses. We are beautiful, we are radiant, we shine with the glory of Hashem and His Shechina. And we are getting ready for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to pour the Yeno Shel Torah, the wine of Torah, inside of us, that we should imbibe it and enjoy. We should become drunk with the Torah, with the Simcha of Torah. But what happens if you have cracks in your veneer? What happens if there are holes in your personality? What happens if there are hairline fractures in your middos, in your character traits? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look, I'm not going to pour the most expensive wine in the world into a vessel, into a glass that has holes inside of it. It's just going to run out and disappear. So therefore, Klal Yisrael, I'm giving you 7 weeks. And in those 7 weeks, your mission and your task in this world is to make sure there's no cracks in your glass. To make sure that there are no holes in your middos, in your character traits. To make sure that there are no blemishes in personality, in the way that you deal with other people in this world. For if you will show up on Shavuos night, and you are filled with different holes and cracks, how can I give you the Torah? But if you come to me after 7 weeks of working on yourself, of going through the words of Pirkei Avos, developing your character and making yourself into a better person, then when you will stand before me and you're ready to receive the Torah, I say there's no better kli, there's no better vessel for me to pour this most pristine wine of Torah into than you, and I will pour it in more and more and more and more, because you will be able to handle it. The land of Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara says, is called Eretz Tzvi. It is the land of the deer. And the Gemara explains, because deer, it looks like their flesh is always expanding. It's amazing when you see deer running in front of you, their flesh is always expanding. There's always room for those bones and that meat. The land of Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Tzvi because it continues to expand. They will never run out of room for the Jewish people. Even if you go there today, one day when they let us back into the Holy Land so we can see with our own eyes, we'll get there and you'll see, as much as they say it's a small little tiny place, but there's so much empty land that is there. You can build and build and build and build and build, and you still will run out of land. So too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ability to pour the Torah inside of us is infinite and limitless. And the neshama is infinite, just like the Torah is infinite, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite. And therefore, if we make ourselves a vessel that is worthy of receiving HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine wisdom, that He's going to pour it in and load us up, we will never run out of space. Hanefesh lo simale, says the Maharal, the soul will never be satisfied. It wants more and more and more. Keep piling it up, pouring it in. But that's what we're doing right now. We are acknowledging and recognizing the middos, the traits that we have in ourselves that are negative, and we are working to fix them up. What is the source in our words of sagely wisdom that will awaken us so that we open our eyes and we see what we need to do to change and become better? Says the Yavitz, that's Pirkei Avos. You open up this masterful book of quotes, and we think that you could just Google best Jewish quotes of all history. You wouldn't find Pirkei Avos. It doesn't work like that. These are so deep. There are so many thousands of pages of commentary that have been poured over the words of Pirkei Avos, because everything that we need to know about self-help and perfection, it's all in here. Now, it's somewhat based on a midrash, what I'm saying right now. The midrash says over the following. The Amar Rabbi Yishmael bar Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yishmael bar Rav Nachman said over the following. Esrim v'shisha doros kodma derech eretz es haTorah. 26 generations before the Torah was given to the Jewish people, derech eretz, which we will translate over here as the way of the land, but it is usually symbolic of good behavior, how to be a mensch here in this world. So 26 generations before the Torah was given over to the world, there was already something called derech eretz, which means you have to be a mensch in order for the Torah to be given to this world. This is in the vernacular which it is normally quoted in. It says, derech eretz kodma l'Torah. Before the Torah was given to the world, and before we're able to receive the Torah, there's something called derech eretz. You have to have good middos, good character traits, know yourself, work on yourself, perfect yourself, be a better person, become a mensch. How do we know this? Because it's written in the Torah. Lishmor as derech eitz hachayim. You should guard the pathway to the tree of life. Derech, what is derech? What is the pathway? Zu derech eretz. That's referring to derech eretz, to good character traits. What is v'achar kach eitz chaim? What does it mean, the tree of life? Of course, zu Torah, that's referring to the Torah. So the Midrash over here is telling us that unless you have something called derech eretz, you cannot find the path to Torah. If you have derech eretz, then you'll get the Torah. You don't have derech eretz, there won't be any Torah. So what does that mean? That means that before a person is going to be worthy of being on the receiving end of the Torah, like we said before from the Yavitz, they must make sure that they're a person that is a kli, that is a vessel that was going to be able to hold and receive the Torah. Only someone with derech eretz, with good qualities, with positive traits, with good characters, only that person is going to be on the level that he's able to be the receiver. We mentioned once in a shir many months ago the idea of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says that the purpose of all of life, the reason that you and I came to this world, our neshamas were granted an opportunity for 120 years to walk the earth and do something with ourselves. What is the purpose? If you'd go and you'd ask the Vilna Gaon, we know he had a very rigorous schedule of learning, and his schedule was that he learned 20 hours of Torah a day. He slept only 2 hours a day at 4 half-an-hour intervals. He had to daven, he had to eat a little bit as well. So you're talking about a man, his whole life literally was learning and living and breathing and eating Torah. That's it. So if you'll ask the Vilna Gaon, great Vilna Gaon, what is the purpose of life? We would assume he would tell us, learn and then learn some more. But the Vilna Gaon says that the purpose of life is l'saken es midosov, to correct and to break your character traits that are negative and that are bad. Ve'im love, and if you're not working on that every single day, lama leichaim, why are you alive in this world? What are you living for? Meaning, really, the Vilna Gaon understands that the greatest thing that a person can do in life is they got to find time to learn Torah, but you cannot learn Torah unless you have outstanding, exceptional Middos, character traits. One of the great sages of our generation, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, is a man, Kanai, is in his 90s. He should live and be well ad mei vesim shana. He has become the leader of Torah Jewry. And somebody once went to his Rebbe, who was Rav Michael Yehuda Lefkowitz, who taught him when he was a young boy in high school. And they asked him, how did your student become such a leader? So amazing, so great. And he said, because I saw him when he was a young man. And the Middos, Toivos, the character traits that this man had, already at a young age, they want such a high, lofty level. On such a person, the Torah can go inside of. And that's what we're saying over here. That if we want on Shavuos to be able to receive the Torah, if we want that we should become Jews that are more imbued and more flavored with the yenai, with the wine of the Torah, the greatest wine that you could possibly, a state bottle, corked in 1862, hid away in some cellar that nobody saw in that winery, and now it's taken out, the bottle's worth maybe, who knows, $100,000. If you want to enjoy that bottle of wine, you have to make sure that you have a good cup that's going to be able to hold it. But if there's cracks and holes in there, the wine's going to drip out. If we have cracks and holes in our character, the wine is going to disappear and drip out as well. And therefore, as we are working towards these 7 weeks of hard work, 7 weeks of growing, 7 weeks of purifying ourselves, the only way that we can truly do it is we must make sure that we are learning Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos is the book, it is the tractate that we have in Shas that focuses in on one thing and one thing only, becoming the best you that you could become. Before Barnes & Noble's had self-help section that right now is probably growing by leaps and bounds, especially after COVID. They probably had to write about 100 more books just to help people get out of the funk of COVID. So it's before Barnes & Noble's. It's before you could Google how to be a better person. It's before there was a man named Dale Carnegie who came to the world. This is the words of the ethics of our fathers. Who are our fathers? We're talking about Rabbi Akiva. We're talking about Rabbi Shimon. We're talking about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. We're talking about the greatest of the greats. And where did they get their information from? They got the information, like it says in the first Mishnah, Sinai. They got it from Har Sinai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave over all of this wisdom to his nation, how to perfect our Middos, our character traits, so that truly derech eretz, the traits, the good character, that will precede the Torah itself. Klal Yisrael, when they were heading towards Har Sinai, and they were getting themselves ready for the great revelation that was going to take place. So we are learning over here that the only way that they were able to do that is if we take these three things to heart. Number one, we said they had to recognize that if the Yetzer Hara, if this evil inclination is going to be very much coursing through the person, very hard to learn Torah at that point. It's very, very hard. When a person's mind is someplace else, not inside the Beis Midrash, not in the Shir, their mind is wandering elsewhere into all the different spiritual criminal activities they could be involved with, very, very hard to learn. Very hard to accept the Torah upon themselves. It's one of the reasons that Torah is so hard to accept, because it challenges us on a daily basis to control our earthly desires. And I'd like to just be free, man. That's what I want over here in California. I'd like to do what I want to do, when I want to do, where I want to do it. And therefore, I don't need someone or something or some omniscient being telling me what to do with my life. The Torah says, no, it's not like that. It says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I created you, I made you your neshama, I made your body, I made your personality traits, I made your middos, your character, I made it all. And I know what is best for you. And I'm telling you, says Hashem, if you don't control the Yetzer Hara will control you, hands down. There is no way around it. And therefore, Pirkei Avos comes, step number 1, learn how to be in control of the Yetzer Hara. Number 2, we said, from the Midrash Shmuel, that these are days right now, that these are days of Avedus, of mourning. They're days of recognition that there's a Midas Hadin, there's an attribute of justice that was in the world, that still hovers around the world. So many of the students of Rabbi Akiva perished during this time. And as we'll see, it seemed to be such a small sin that they did. They did not give each other the proper respect and dignity and honor. And therefore, we'll have to speak about that. How could such a thing be so blown out of proportion that 24,000 students have to die a horrible death during this time? But since that we know that it's a serious time in the year, so there's a little bit more trepidation, a little bit more reverence that we have, and therefore we could receive the words of rebuke and spiritual criticism much better during this time. Once that we have those two things working for us, where we are controlling the physical, the Yetzer Hara, and we are, as the Midrash Shmuel says, that we are utilizing this time because we can hear better what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to us, then we can get into the true spiritual work on our Middos. It is said over that the Nevardika Yeshiva, Rabbi Yosef Horowitz, who was the altar of Nevardik, he believed very strongly in learning Musar. And in his Beis HaMidrash, there were hours, there were time periods every day where the boys in the yeshiva, they would learn Musar, not Musar the way that we do it so gently and so kindly and so nice. They used to learn it, they would sit down with their Musar Sefer, whatever book it might have been, and they would shuckle, they would rock back and forth, and they would sometimes scream at the top of their lungs, and they would pound on the desks, and some of them would be brought to tears when they would see what they had to work on and build and correct inside of themselves. So a wealthy man once came to meet Rav Yosef Horowitz, the altar of Nevarduk, and he wanted perhaps to make a donation to the yeshiva. And he told him, come see what we're doing over here. And he walked him into the Beis Midrash at the time of Musar Seder, which is the coveted time of the day in the Nevarduk yeshiva, where the boys were learning with all such loud voices, screaming, yelling, pounding, walking back and forth, crying, you name it, everything was going on. So this man looks around and he says, this is a yeshiva. This is a loony bin over here. These people are meshuggah, they're crazy. It's a crazy house. So the altar said back to him, he says, it's true. It is a crazy house. When they come into these doors over here, they come in crazy. By the time that they leave here, they are tzaddikim. They're the most righteous that you could imagine. Klal Yisrael was coming from Mitzrayim. They were coming from Egypt. They were coming from a land of licentiousness, a world of Yetzer Hara, a world of darkness, a world of impurity. Many of them had lost their faith along the way. They were struggling to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know how much work they had to do on themselves? They had to work day and night to make sure that they were prepared and they were ready to stand by Har Sinai. The only way that they could do it is if they were working on cleansing and emptying themselves out from the Middos Rois. So the Eitz Yosef says on this midrash of Derech Eretz Kadma L'Torah, he says, Lo harais boa sha'midos ha'toivos. The good traits that a person, the good character traits that a person has, Hema Mesharsim L'Torah, they are the Mesharsim, they are the servants of Torah. Meaning a Mesharis is like your butler. He is the servant in the house. He's the one that is Mesharis, that is taking care of you, your attendant. That's the attendant. Says the Eitz Yosef, the Middos Tovos, the good character traits that you have, they are the Mesharasim, they are the attendants of Torah. V'tzarech ha'adam li'intaya beliba middos ha'tovos. And therefore a person must implant inside of his heart positive character traits. B'chidei shal yedei zeh, through this, tishkoin ha'torah b'kirboi. The Torah is going to dwell inside of your heart. Ki tzarech sheyiras chetoi yekodemes lechachmasai. Because in order for the wisdom of the Torah to be able to find a pathway and an entranceway inside of you, you must be imbued and filled with positive traits first. The Middos tovos, the traits that a person will have, they're going to enhance your learning. They're going to help you through the Torah that you learn and that you try to keep. Good Middos means you'll have patience. Good Middos means that you will be kind. Good Middos means that you will be benevolent, you'll be compassionate, you'll be willing to liken yourself to the traits of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when so much of our mitzvah observance is dependent upon this world, bein adam lechaver, between us and our fellow man, therefore the only way that you can deal with another person properly, the only way that you can deal with them properly, is if you have Middos tovos, good Middos. I was once told over by an old Jew who went through the Holocaust and lived many years in Eretz Yisrael in Yerushalayim, eventually came to America and built a yeshiva in America. He said that they once asked the Chabina Rebbe, who was a great tzaddik in the old city of Yerushalayim, not the old, but in the Mei Sharim area. A family was marrying off their first daughter. They were getting involved in shidduchim. And they came to the Rebbe, they asked him, what trait should we look for? What should we look for in a chassan and a groom for our daughter? So he looked at the father and he said 3 things. Middos tovos, good character traits. Secondly, Middos tovos, good character traits. Thirdly, Middos tovos, good character traits. If you find a person who has good character traits, they'll be able to weather the storms of life. They will be able to plow through the situations that will come this way and that way, and from every single direction. They'll stay calm, they'll be peaceful, they'll be kind, they won't snap, they won't get nasty, they won't scream, they won't yell. They'll be able to do it all. And the Torah itself is the crowning glory of the Jew, which gives us the insight that we need to truly know how to act and to behave here in this world. If you don't have Middos tovos to start with, the Torah can't get inside. But there's another advantage that comes. The Vilna Gaon writes in Mishlei, the Torah works in 2 ways. The Torah is likened to mayim, to water. And water, when it rains down from the sky, it falls down on the ground. Says the Vilna Gaon, if you have plants underneath, you have good fertile soil and seeds, maybe there's rose bushes or there are flowers or there are fruit trees, and the water comes down, what's going to grow? What's going to grow is beautiful fruit trees, flowers, fragrant, beautiful, nice to look at, unbelievable colors. It's all going to grow up so nicely. But let's say that underneath the ground, the soil is not so good, and it's just weedy kind of area over there, and the rain comes falling down onto the ground. What's going to grow out of that ground? Weeds. Weeds and thorns and thistles and things that themselves are of no benefit at all to you. Rather, they will just make you concerned that your field is never going to sprout forth anything beneficial. Says the Vilna Gaon, that's the way the Torah works with us. If a person has good middos, they have good character traits, they're pleasant, they're kind, they're giving, they're caring, they're loving, they're compassionate. And now he begins learning more Torah every day, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So it just expands the positive traits that he has. It makes him that much more beautiful, that much more noble and refined, that much greater. But if a person has negative character traits inside of them, stingy, lazy, nasty, mean, crude, and you name it, whatever they have, and then he learns Torah, you would think Torah is going to be an amazing thing for him. what's going to grow out of him are the weeds of his bad Middos. Are going to give him more energy, more koyach, more power to him to be able to do the things that he's doing wrong. And he'll have 1,000 proofs from the Torah of why it is that whatever he's doing is the right thing. So the question we must ask ourselves in these final weeks before the Torah is going to be given to us is, do we have seeds that will sprout forth beautiful flowers and luscious fruit trees? Or do we have seedy, weedy things growing underneath us that if we try to learn, that's all that's going to come out of us? And therefore, our goal and our mission and our task during this time is make ourselves as pure and as clean and as radiant as we possibly can. And if a person will do that, so then the bracha that they're going to have is that when they will stand by Har Sinai on Shavuos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to pour down the Torah inside of them. But all is not lost. One last thing I'd like to add in, because this is important for us to note. The Torah itself is the machshir, is the cleansing agent that a person brings inside of themselves, that if in fact they don't have good middos, and if in fact they're not sure where to get those good middos, those good traits from, the Torah works in such a way that if you will learn with the right intention, and you want it to make an impression on you for the positive in a beneficial way, so the power of Torah is so great that it can actually come and wipe away the negative traits, clean out the dirt that is there. We just had before Pesach, right? We had the kasha, all of our utensils. We had the kasha, our ovens. What do you do with that oven over there? You turn it on to the self-clean, and you burn out all of the dirt. You burn out all the chametz that is there. The Torah burns everything out of us to make sure that we are clean, that we are pure, that we have everything that it takes to be able to live the life according to the Torah, the way that it's supposed to be. So I had many years ago when I was a bacher learning in yeshiva, so there was a guy in the yeshiva. He was a genius of a person, literally a genius. He used to stay up late every single night learning and learning and learning and learning and learning. And in the morning he was so exhausted, he was so tired, he couldn't wake up in the morning. Almost never ever came to Shachris in the morning, to the morning prayers, which to me was the worst thing in the world. How could a person miss Shachris? Didn't understand it all. And then I noticed not only did he miss Shachris, but he just wasn't so careful, the things that came out of his mouth and the way that he treated people, just all around. It was just not a very balanced individual. In the brains, he was a genius. In his middos, in his character traits, he was lower than the average IQ that you could imagine. So this person bothered me to no end. But I couldn't understand how someone who learned so much Torah would behave the way that he behaved. And one time, he was sick, and I said to myself, I'll be a nice guy. This poor guy is sick. I'll go to the dining room at dinner time. I'll take 2 portions of dinner. I'll bring 1 portion for myself, 1 portion for him. I'll try to take care of him. Maybe if you do some good for someone that you dislike, it makes things easier. So I come to the guy's room, and I walk in there, and I knock on the door, and he says, come in. I walk in, and I see he's reading some book, and I lean over his shoulder, and I see a explicative word over there, and I'm shocked. I can't believe this guy who learns so much Torah is reading these kind of books. What's going on over here? Anyway, he says, yeah, you need something? I said, no, I see you've been sick for like the last several days. I was afraid maybe you didn't have dinner tonight, so I brought you dinner. So I give him the plate of dinner, and there was a lid. A plate on top is a lid, so you couldn't see what it was. And I put it down, he takes it, he puts it down on his desk, and he opens it up, and he sees that I brought him tops. It was meat night. It was chicken night. And I brought him tops. Tops is the white meat. Bottoms is the dark meat. I brought him tops. I don't know, I thought he liked tops. So he looks at me and he says, first of all, somebody else already brought me dinner. And second of all, I don't like tops. I said, okay, I'm sorry. Sorry for trying to be a nice guy. I apologize. Forgive me, I'll never try to be nice to you again. And therein ensued a running machlekes, a running tension between the two of us that lasted for the whole time that he was there in the yeshiva. And there were things that would happen even sometimes publicly where he would put me down. But that was a whole story. It was a whole story. Anyway, he disappeared from yeshiva one year. He went off to learn in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And he went to one of the most elite yeshivas. I said, good, they must have good beds and pillows over there because he's probably going to sleep a lot. But no, he went there to that yeshiva and he began steiging day and night. Not just nights, day and night he was learning. And he went on while he was there, and I think it was 3 years, something like that. He ended up going through all of Shas, all of the Talmud. He came back once to visit the yeshiva. He didn't stay there. He went to Lakewood afterwards. He came back to visit the yeshiva. He looked like a different person. There was a sense of responsibility, of maturity, of seriousness that was about him. He transformed while he was there. He went to Lakewood. He married into a very nice family. And a couple of years later, I was standing in the hallways of the yeshiva, and I see that there's a new sefer, a brand new book that was printed. And I open it up, and I look to the front page, who's the author, and lo and behold, it is this guy. The guy that slept in, the guy who only doesn't like tops, the guy that had bad language in the books that he was reading. This guy wrote a sefer, wrote a book of his chidushim, of his novella, his novel ideas and insights into all of Shas. Do you know what that means? That means that he felt so comfortable in his knowledge of all of Shas, all the Talmud, that he wrote an entire commentary of what he felt were his greatest insights and ideas into all of Shas. I was in shock. I was in absolute shock. So I came to my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Aaron Feldman, and I said to him, look, I know this guy. I was in yeshiva with him. I could tell you stories from here until tomorrow about his character, about his decency, about everything. I said, Rosh, did you see the haskama? Did you see the approbation that the Rosh Yeshivas in Lakewood gave him? They're talking about him that he is like the next leader of the generation. He's so refined and he's so this and he's great. And I said, how did he write such things? So the Rosh Yeshiva said to me the following words. He said, either they don't recognize who he really is, or he says, you don't recognize what the power of Torah truly is. And it could very well be that this young man who had his cracks in his glass while he was here in yeshiva so many years ago, and the wine that he learned from his Rabbi was just flowing right out after a whole day of learning because there were too many holes in the system, it could very well be that the Torah that he learned changed and transformed and made him a different person. And he's not the same guy that you knew from the dormitories years ago who made that face at you and with such disdain said, I don't even like tops. Now if you would bring him tops, he would say, tops, bottoms, whatever you bring me, thank you so much. You cared enough about me, you realized that I was sick, you went out of your way, you brought me dinner. Wow. Thank you so much. How can I ever repay you? I can never repay you. Thank you, I really appreciate it. And that is the koyach, that is the power of Torah. So really, derech eretz, our Middos comes before the Torah, and that is why we're learning Pirkei Avos at this point. We're trying to perfect and to purify ourselves, to make ourselves that vessel that is going to be worthy and going to be whole, to be able to receive the beauty of the Torah. At the same time, just remember, even if we don't accomplish enough over the next 7 weeks, now we're down to 5 weeks, we don't accomplish enough over the next 5 weeks of our lives, but we try concerted efforts. And then we come to Shavuos, and on Shavuos night we recognize going into the night, I didn't get there, Hashem. I'm not holding on the high levels that you expect me to be holding on before Shavuos comes. but I want to get to that level and I want the Torah to have an impact on me. So then the Torah that we learn on Shavuos and the Torah that we'll learn even afterwards, it's going to be like that self-cleaning oven that comes in and gets rid of all of the rust, all of the schmutz, all of the grease, all the grime, all the dirt, gets rid of all of it, cleans it out and kashes it so that it's ready now to be used on Pesach as the non-chametz oven. So too by us, the Torah will come and it will clean out the schmutz. It will clean out the impurities. It will clean out the spiritual deficiencies. It will get rid of all of the treif that is there. And it will cleanse us and it will make us pure and kosher as well. So that through the work that we do beforehand on perfecting ourselves and the excitement that we have as we're standing by Har Sinai receiving the Torah, recognizing that yes, I still have some cracks in the glass and there's some holes in my character, my personality. Nevertheless, Hashem, I trust in you that if I will engage myself in Torah study, that is the greatest fires of cleansing agents that a person could have. And then on Shavuos night, as we are standing, K'ish echad u'b'lev echad, like one nation, getting ready to receive the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will peer into our hearts, into our souls. He'll see all of the efforts, all the work that we made to become greater people. He'll see that we want to continue to become great as we go through the lifetime of Torah and its learning. And in that zechus and Yetz Hashem, we will be zeiche. As Klal Yisrael was able to stand by Har Sinai and receive the Torah on such a high level, we should merit ourselves to receive the Torah on the highest level possible and keep climbing in our march and our charge towards Har Sinai all of the days of our life. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. All the best.